All right, good day, everyone. My name is Nathaniel Smith. I'm one of the local health promotion specialists here at CFB Borden, and I'm here to deliver a briefing on Canada's low-risk drinking guidelines. Before we do get to that briefing, I thought I'd quickly go over what's available to you through your health promotion program. So here's a quick list of the programs available to you through us in health promotion. So you can see that we offer two programs under nutritional wellness, weight wellness, and top fuel for top performance. We offer one program under injury reduction called Injury Reduction Strategies. Two programs under the Addictions Awareness program, Bud Out, and our alcohol, other drugs, gambling, and gaming awareness for supervisors. So today's briefing more or less focuses on a portion of that program. And finally, under social wellness, we offer 5 programs: a stress management program, a mental fitness and suicide awareness program, Managing Angry Moments is our anger management program, Intercom is a communication program, and finally, our Respecting the CAF program is on hold at the moment under the kind of getting revamped to meet the needs of some changes in that area. So again, those are all the programs available to you through health promotion. Please feel free to contact us regarding these programs or any information on these topics and subjects. So objectives for today's briefing is to more or less first look at harm reduction strategies, what it all consists of and what that's all about. We're then going to focus on the use of alcohol in the CAF and then become familiar with Canada's low-risk drinking guidelines. So harm reduction in the CAF. So harm reduction is more or less an approach used to minimize the negative impacts of certain behaviors that tend to lead to those negative impacts. So within the CAF, we focus on harm reduction around alcohol, gambling, gaming, and cannabis use. Of course, there are many other harm reduction approaches taken all over Canada, all over the world, but in the CAF, we primarily focus on harm reduction approaches in these areas. With regards to alcohol, we focus on the low-risk drinking guidelines, which we will get to here shortly. With regards to gambling and gaming, we focus on harm reduction approaches such as reduction in time spent in those activities and perhaps the amount of money spent in those activities and such things like that. Those are examples of harm reduction approaches. And finally, our newest harm reduction approach is with cannabis. Again, when it was legalized a few years back, we took a harm reduction approach, just like the rest of Canadian society, with cannabis use. And there are cannabis, low-risk cannabis use guidelines, very similar to how the low-risk alcohol guidelines are as well. So again, that's a quick example of the harm reduction approach taken within the Canadian Armed Forces. So again, harm reduction is an approach aimed to reduce the negative impacts of certain behaviors. And today, we're going to focus on alcohol. And why only alcohol? Well, let's look at some stats. So from the last health and lifestyle information survey, it was reported that 94% of CAF members choose to consume alcohol. 44% reported that they would consume more than 2 standard drinks on any given day. Less than 6% of CAF members reported having used illicit drugs. And you can see the last point on there, high use of prescription and over-the-counter medication in the CAF. So how do these stats compare to Canadian civilian stats? Well, for the first one, 80% of Canadians have identified that they choose to consume alcohol, and only 19% have reported that they would consume more than 2 standard drinks on any given day. With regards to illicit drug use, 12% of the Canadian population have identified. So you can see some of the changes or the differences in between, again, the Canadian Armed Forces and the civilian population here in Canada. And of course, why are we going to focus on alcohol? Well, numbers and stats are a little bit higher there. So again, perhaps there's a need there. So why do people use alcohol? I always like to have a conversation around this, and we tend to come up with all kinds of different answers and discussions. But you can see here some of the ones that tend to come up. People use alcohol to sleep better, to forget, to feel better, to be happy, or maybe to feel nothing at all. Maybe they choose to consume alcohol to be accepted by peers, to be social, maybe for fun, and finally, maybe to cope. So, all kinds of potential reasons, maybe just examples. There are probably several others that aren't on this list. I usually wrap up this conversation by asking which one of these reasons uh, can potentially lead someone to having issues or problems. And after a quick discussion, we get to the same answer with all groups, with all discussions, and that is any of these can lead to issues or problems. What it does come down to is typically the frequency and intensity of use. So that brings us to the continuum of addiction, which identifies and highlights exactly that. You can see it with the one box here that problems increase with use. So this any behavior, we're talking about alcohol here, but any behavior again starts in that experimental phase where somebody will try, in this case, perhaps newly posted to the base, just turned of age, whatever the case may be, maybe wasn't in a society or environment that encouraged use. So perhaps they were going to experiment and try alcohol for the first time. So that's at the bottom of the stage here in green in the experimental category. Experimental can easily and quickly change to occasional, where somebody increases use. Maybe that's on unit functions. Every unit function, they will consume a drink or two. But again, still very minimal and probably no associated negative impacts here. Now, in the right environment, with the right group of people, that occasional use can easily become regular use. So that could be perhaps every TGIT. That could be perhaps every weekend, perhaps after every hockey game, whatever the case may be. Use has increased, and you can see now the color of the category has changed to yellow. Negative impacts here are still very minimum, but again are increasing a little bit. Now the next stage, misuse. So this occurs when use starts to impact normal functions in life, and they start to see negative consequences due to that use. Examples would be perhaps performance issues at work, issues with relationships, perhaps financial stress because they're spending too much money on that behavior, on their alcohol consumption, perhaps troubles with the loss. So those are all examples of what would place somebody in the misuse category stage in this continuum here. And finally, the last stage that you see here is dependency. And that occurs when somebody more or less loses the ability to control that use and will continue to use, in this case, alcohol, focusing on that, uh, despite the negative consequences that they are experiencing. So if they are running into issues at work, with relationships, financial stress, they will continue to use because they've lost the ability to control. So that's a little bit on the continuum of addiction from experimenting with alcohol or any substance really, all the way up to dependency. Now, with regards to harm reduction approaches and the low risk drinking guidelines, should somebody choose to focus and follow those guidelines, for the most part, that will help people stay uh, towards the lower end of this continuum. So closer to the green and perhaps the yellow stages of this. Not all the time, but for the most part, we can say that that will help people stay at those stages of the continuum. Now, for those, or for most people, again, we're more familiar with this continuum, this graph versus the last one, but it's the same principle here. So here you're looking at your mental health continuum model and how addictions issues, use of alcohol can be placed throughout the model. The colors follow the exact same colors that are linked with the continuum of addiction that you just saw. So in the green and the healthy, you see here no or occasional, perhaps social use of alcohol. Uh, again, probably very limited negative impacts, if any. In the yellow, regular but controlled use. So again, we described what that would be earlier. That could be weekly TGITs, that could be after every gathering, whatever the case may be, increase in use, increase in potential issues as well. But again, very minimal here. Perhaps the odd time somebody would spend excess of what they had planned to, perhaps the odd hangover, etc. But again, still in the yellow, but minimum negative effects. Moving on to the next category here, injured. So again, you can see here increase in use with it being a little bit harder to control with those negative consequences, just like we described earlier. And finally, in the ill, in the red, again, frequent use with the inability to control with severe consequences. So that's what you're looking at with regards to alcohol use throughout the mental health continuum model, from healthy to ill, from green to red. And again, very similar. Should somebody choose to follow the low risk drinking guidelines, that will help them stay towards the green side of the continuum. Not always, but for the most part, it will. The last thing that we'll look at prior to discussing the low risk drinking guidelines is causes of substance use problems. So, for a long period of time, many looked at trying to distinguish what would cause someone to have issues around addiction and substance misuse. And they found that it was very difficult to pinpoint an exact equation or formula that would lead to those issues. But they did find a correlation between these three factors that you see here: a genetic factor, an environmental factor, and a personal factor. So the genetic factor, I'll quickly describe the three in kind of minor detail here. But the genetic factor, again, some individuals are predisposed through their genetics to have an increased risk of issues around addiction and mental health issues as well that can lead to that addiction issue. So again, that's a genetic factor. On the environmental side, certain environments can encourage or even promote the use of alcohol, binge drinking, etc. Environmental factor can also be situations or environments that are high levels of stress. So those are examples of how the environment can impact someone's use. So again, if the environment is promoting, encouraging heavy drinking, chances are more people are going to participate in that. On the personal side, now we're looking at individual choices, people's ability to cope, and certain characteristic traits that can either encourage issues to happen or increase risk for issues to happen, or decrease that risk for it to happen. Now, what I've been doing, I'm going to do the exact same thing here. How does someone following the low risk drinking guidelines, how does that come into play with this graph here, these causes? So in the environmental section, if an environment is a culture is more or less promoting the low risk drinking guidelines and following that, once again, chances are more individuals are going to follow suit and do the same thing, reducing the negative impacts on that culture, on that environment. And it's the opposite, as I just described. If there's heavy drinking being encouraged, again, more people will participate in that type of behavior versus following the low risk drinking guidelines. And same thing on the personal side. So if people are choosing to follow the low risk drinking guidelines, chances are they are going to choose healthier options on how to manage their stress, on how to cope with uh, issues versus turning towards alcohol or other negative um, coping strategies that increase stress and can even increase the issues and the problems that the person is dealing with. So that's a quick look on how the low risk drinking guidelines, education, awareness can impact our environment and our personal choices around these causes of substance use problems. So what exactly are the low risk drinking guidelines? Well, let's get to that right now. So once again, the low risk drinking guidelines, again, we're using Canada's low risk drinking guidelines, um, is a harm reduction approach that will help to mitigate the negative consequences associated with people choosing to consume alcohol. Now, these low risk drinking guidelines are not um, kind of guides for people to start to consume alcohol or encouraging people to start to consume alcohol. These are guidelines for people that are already consuming alcohol. These guidelines will help minimize the risk. Once again, it's not no risk, it is reducing the risk of that negative consequences due to that behavior, in this case, consuming alcohol. So let's move on and look at what exactly the low risk drinking guidelines are here in Canada. So I'll put them up on here and let's talk about each. So for women, 0 to 2 per day and a maximum of 10 per week. And for men, 0 to 3 per day with a maximum of 15 per week. So typically always get some interesting questions around all of this. Again, can we keep and gather all of our 2 drinks per day to have 10 on our TGIT or on the weekend? No, absolutely not. You're then looking at that binge drinking. So 0 to 2 maximum per day with a maximum of 10 per week, or 0 to 3 and 15 per week for men. What is also interesting about this is, of course, you do the math very quickly. You're noticing that again, there is not 14 for women or 21 for men. They are encouraging individuals to aim for at least 2 days per week with no alcohol use. So again, benefits of reducing um, the daily consumption so that people do have a few days off of alcohol, regardless of the amount that they are drinking. Again, the goal is, I shouldn't say the goal, but the lower risk is 0. But again, to be able to still consume alcohol at a lower risk, aim for 0 to 2 for women, 0 to 3 for men. I always joke around about this. These are not objectives. These are not goals. Should you be not consuming these numbers right now, stick with that. Should you be consuming more than this, whether it's daily or weekly, again, consider reducing your risk by following these guidelines. So I only had 1 drink, right? I don't think this is what Canada's low risk drinking guidelines are talking about with regards to those drink sizes. So what exactly is considered a standard drink? Let's focus on that right now. So for wine, a standard drink is considered to be 5 ounces at 12%. For liquor, 1.5 ounces, again at 40%. And for beer or your spirits, 12 ounces at 5%. So again, if you're at any restaurant and they ask you for the supersize and you say yes, chances are you are then increasing your standard drink to above what a standard drink is, or the drink that you ordered will be above that standard drink. So something to think about and to consider. And why these numbers? So again, one standard drink is equivalent to 13.6 grams of alcohol. So that's why the 5 ounces, the 1.5 ounces, and or the 12 ounces all have that 13.6 grams of alcohol for one standard drink. So that's what is considered a standard drink. The low risk drinking guidelines do not necessarily apply to everyone either. So people with health problems or who are taking certain medications, the low risk drinking guidelines will not apply to. Uh, Others that would be on that list are people who need to be alert, people with a history of drinking problems, women who are pregnant and or breastfeeding, and people who will be operating a vehicle, perhaps heavy machinery, etc. So again, what would these individuals be encouraged to aim for? Hopefully you've guessed it, zero, right? So again, the low risk drinking guidelines do not necessarily apply to everyone. Some individuals should be aiming for zero, regardless of what the low risk drinking guidelines are encouraging. With regards to resources, so if someone does find themselves difficult to stick to those low risk drinking guidelines, want to know what is available to help, or find themselves in a situation where they are needing help, here are a few different resources. So again, you've got your health services here at CFP Borden or any Canadian Armed Forces base and or wing. You've got your, where you have your base medical officer and or your addiction counselor. So should you want to see the addiction counselor, you do not have to go through your chain of command. You do not have to go through your medical officer. You can simply call your base mental health services and ask for that appointment with the base addiction counselor, and that will be made for you. Your Canadian Forces Members Assistance Program is another resource available to you as a CAF member and your family members as well. Your chain of command, they're there to help and will facilitate you to get to those resources. EAP stands for Employee Assistance Program. For civilian employees, you will have your own employee assistance program, similar to your Canadian Forces Members Assistance Program for your CAF member. Of course, there will be local addiction agencies, and your base health promotion staff can help as well with regards to referring you to services that are available in the area. So today we've briefly discussed what constitutes or what is harm reduction within the Canadian Armed Forces. Again, harm reduction is an approach to reduce the negative impacts of certain behaviors. And today we're looking at and discussing the impacts, the negative impacts that alcohol can have for somebody. We then discussed Canada's low risk drinking guidelines, which again is a harm reduction approach to reduce the impact should somebody be choosing to consume alcohol. And then we looked at some available resources should that be of benefit or assistance be required for somebody. So I'm going to wrap up today by leaving these resources up for you to quickly look at, jot down. Again, you've got your Canadian Forces Members Assistance Program, a few other national resources that anybody can contact and use. Locally, again, as I encouraged earlier, please feel free to contact your local health services for more assistance as well. Well, again, that was a quick uh, we'll say overview of some harm reduction strategies that the Canadian Armed Forces uses surrounding alcohol, specifically looking at the low risk drinking guidelines that are set aside to reduce the impacts of alcohol use in our society within our environments. Thank you very much and have yourself a great day.